House will be in order. Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., March 8, 2011. I hereby appoint the Honorable Kevin Yoder to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 5, 2011, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each, but in no event shall debate continue beyond 3:50 p.m. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns, for 5 minutes.
Unanimous consent to revise and extend.
So approved.
Mr. Speaker, last week, as chairman of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee of Energy and Commerce, I held a hearing on the problem of Medicare fraud. Now, this is not a new issue. It's been a continuing problem with Medicare. And I've been concerned about Medicare fraud from some time here. In last Congress, I introduced a bill to increase the civil and criminal penalties on those who defraud the Medicare program. In fact, in 1990, the Government Accounting Office, GAO, listed both Medicare and Medicaid as high risk because these programs are vulnerable to fraud, waste, fraud, and abuse, and mismanagement. Now, how badly mismanagement are we talking about? Well, the GAO recently issued a report about that there was $48 billion just in improper payments. Now, this isn't fraud. This is just improper payments. So when it comes to fraud, it is estimated anywhere from $60 to $90 billion lost to Medicare fraud every year. Now, during this hearing, I asked the Director of Medicare Program Integrity, whose job it is to protect Medicare against fraud and abuse, if he knew how much money is lost to fraud in Medicare. He could not answer this question. The following week, Secretary Sebelius was asked in a Health Subcommittee hearing if she knew how much money was lost to fraud in Medicare. Her answer, quote, "If we knew how big it was, hopefully we would shut it down," end quote. But in my hearing, Special Agent Omar Perez, the head of the Medicare Fraud Strike Force in the Miami region of Florida for the Office of the Inspector General, testified he was able to find $3.8 billion in Medicare fraud. My colleagues, this is one city. They've extrapolated across 50 states with almost 20,000 municipalities. You can see how we could get to $60 to $90 billion in fraud. According to the Inspector General, Medicare fraud is more lucrative than the drug trade with easy money, less violence, lighter punishments, and organized crime is taking notice and getting involved in defrauding Medicare. So here are 5 reform ideas that came out of this hearing that were mentioned to help secure Medicare against criminals engaged in defrauding the program. First, Medicare needs to maintain better control over their provider network. It's easy for a company to do business with Medicare, and the burden is on the government to remove a company from the Medicare program. This needs to change to allow the government to remove bad actors from the program quickly and efficiently. Secondly, Medicare needs to significantly improve their provider and supplier screening process. While individuals have a right to Medicare, companies do not have a right to become or stay a Medicare provider. And third, Medicare needs to shift away from the fee-for-service program. A capitated managed care organization provides a strong financial incentive to the managed care organization to eliminate fraud and abuse. It is the managed care plan that has the financial risk and not the United States federal government. When criminals perform fraud, managed care organizations present its own set of challenges, but needs to be considered when discussing reforms to eliminate fraud in Medicare. And fourth, Medicare needs to increase the role of physicians in detecting and preventing fraud themselves. Medicare providers and suppliers must use a doctor's prescription to obtain government reimbursement. Bad actors forge these documents. Previously, the GAO has recommended that Medicare require that physicians receive a statement of Medicare home health services that their patients receive so they can review the documents. This will allow them to look at it carefully and detect any potential misuse of their authorizations. And lastly, Medicare needs to use predictive computer modeling and other technologies. The credit card industry uses this modeling to identify potentially fraudulent transactions. Medicare and Medicaid should adopt this style of analysis to prevent fraudulent claims. Mr. Speaker, these are 5 simple ideas to empower the Medicare program to stop the fraud in this system, and these were recommended from the hearing we had in Oversight and Investigation. It must be stated again, there is an estimated $60 to $90 billion in fraud in Medicare every year. And of course, no one over at Health and Human Services knows how much is lost. The Secretary of Health and Human Services could not even come up with a number. And think of that. After 45 years of this program, no one knows how much fraud is in Medicare and have taken no steps to really analyze and find out. And yet we have all the baby boomers are beginning to retire, the cost of Medicare will explode, and the hidden costs will increase. My committee will forward the material from the Oversight Investigation hearing to the Health Subcommittee to start to develop legislation to address these problems with Medicare fraud. We have a $1.5 trillion deficit, and eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse is necessary to balance our budget, and we should start now.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had the privilege this morning to participate in a fascinating, in-depth discussion sponsored by the National Journal and the Regents Foundation, Living Well at the End of Life, a national conversation. It was made possible by a group that, an insurance company headquartered in my hometown, Portland, Oregon, and the deep commitment that its President and CEO, Mark Gans, has to be able to make sure that families have the information and the tools they have necessary to make sure that they understand their treatment choices and that they are respected. This is an issue that goes far beyond the so-called end of life. This is key so that everybody knows their health care choices, they understand their choices, and they make their wishes known, their choices honored and respected. It is a mistake, as we have these conversations, to mistake the high cost of end of life with concerns about health care reform. When people are seriously ill, they have high health care spending, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is a natural consequence of what happens when people need more hospitalization, more intense activity. But too often, the sickest and most vulnerable have negative experiences in our complex healthcare system, which creates unnecessary strains on both the patients and the caregivers. And it's a mistake to somehow confuse this with people who are seriously terminally